Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the set. TGIF, this is a special edition. Tonight, I am bringing on three guests that I am very excited to have. This is Educators Part 2. We're going to be speaking about the conditions in the public education system. We are also going to be having an open dialogue on what they see and their opinions on COVID and how it has affected education and what their thoughts are. So I hope everybody's had an easy week. I hope everybody that joins us tonight is ready to get some solid information and opinions from people that bring a lot of experience to the show. We have two returning guests, John Losasso, or I have to call him John, but to the audience, he's John Losasso and Merrill Davis. And joining the set tonight for the first time that didn't get to make it in the initial Educators podcast was Miss Carolyn Estrella Aponte. And I am very excited to have her on as well. I hope everybody is ready to just get their minds blown and also learn a lot from these people and what they have to bring to the table. So, with that being said, let's start this show. Oops. Where is it? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the set. I'm your host, Mr. A. Tonight, Educators 2. I hope everybody had a great week. I hope everybody is ready to celebrate the end of the week. Friday, hoy si bebe. I hope not too much. And if you are, please do not drink and drive. A lot of things happening in the news. The election is drawing to a close. I know there's a lot of pressure to get your votes in and do what you need to do to make sure you are counted. So if you haven't been able to mail in your vote, please take it down by hand or find a way to get your vote cast. Outside of that, we've been very busy. And tonight we are going to have a great show. And I can't say it enough how excited I am to have these people. But before we do, in the spirit of education, I had a talk with a very close friend of mine online this week, and I was discussing with him how people need to read. My daughter is a consumer of books, and I don't just mean purchasing them. I mean she literally consumes books. So, excuse me. With that being said, I asked if he could make some recommendations for people to read, to garner insight, to become more knowledgeable about how this country works, its history, and things that we've gone through that maybe not everybody learns about. And he made a few suggestions. So in that spirit, I want to share these books with you. The first book that I want to share with you is Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by author Isabel Wilkerson. So I hope everybody can take the time to pick this book up. Excuse me. Had a family gathering and that food is coming up. Excuse me. That's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. The next book. Oh, my list just disappeared. Awesome. So much for that. Anyway, so tonight, as I said, we're going to welcome three guests. The first person that I want to welcome to the set was not able to make the first show, but I am excited to have her here. I am going to bring her up on the screen, and then I'm going to read a bit of information about her bio, her background. I know that she said that she doesn't need for me to go through the whole thing, but I think that we owe her this much. She's made the time, so I just want everybody to become familiar with who she is. Miss Carolyn Estrella Aponte. Miss Aponte is the daughter of immigrants from the Dominican Republic. She was born in Miami and raised in Brooklyn. She's been married to 14, and this is her words, glorious years to Mr. Felix Aponte, and they share a precious 2-year-old schnauzer named Riley Grace. She enjoys reading, entertaining, music, traveling, relaxing at the beach, and spending time with friends and family. She's a proud educator of over 30 years of experience. In Brooklyn, she received her bachelor's degree in elementary education English from Roberts Wesleyan College in Rochester, a master's in elementary education from SUNY College in Brockport, New York, and a second master's in education and leadership from St. John's Fisher College in Rochester. People, I don't know if you just heard all the letters behind this woman's name and education and everything else in between, but this woman brings an incredible amount of experience to the table. So this isn't just somebody off the street. This woman has a solid background. She, let's see, I'm certified to teach children from grades K through 6, English language learners, also certified as an administrator for grades K through 12. Experience includes classroom teaching, literacy coach, mentor, school district administrator, school level assistant principal, and charter school principal. Carolyn, you know what? I'm going to cut this short because by the time I'm done, people are going to be emailing you. I'm telling you, because this is just amazing. It definitely is. The accomplishments, the education, all the experience that you bring is truly amazing. And I just want to welcome you tonight to the set. And I hope that, as we spoke earlier, that you can speak freely and let the people know your thoughts unmitigated. Okay?
Yes.
So the second gentleman that I want to welcome to the set, he has chosen an easier route in his bio. Mr. Merrill Davis. He's 22 years in education, 15 years in the Department of Education, 7 years charter. Former head coach at Medgar Evers College and married father of 2. The set welcomes Mr. Merrill Davis. Merrill,
Yes.
how are we doing tonight?
I'm great. You know, you had to put me behind Miss Aponte, but I appreciate that. I take it.
Tough act to follow, isn't it? All right. Now, this next gentleman, he is another, this is a heavy hitter, this guy. He was on our original show, and I think that he and Merrill really carried not only a strong show, but they just busted my brain with their perspectives and understanding and what they saw and spoke on. I'm going to say his full name, even though he doesn't like it. Mr. John Losasso is a retired high school English teacher and dean who currently works part-time as a staff trainer and academic coach in the Pace University Learning Center in Pleasantville, New York. In addition to teaching, John coached girls varsity basketball throughout his 36 years working from the NYC Department of Education. Born and raised in Brooklyn, John now resides in the North Bronx, where he spends his days writing and, along with his wife and high school principal, raising his almost 2-year-old son. The set welcomes the legendary Mr. John Losasso.
Good evening.
How are
I don't
you
know why.
today?
Where'd you get the impression I don't like my last name?
Well, I know the last couple of times you kept telling me, "Hey, Ernest, listen, it's just
call me
John,
John.
okay?
Yeah,
It's just John."
And my little boy turned 2, actually.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, on September 28th, which also happens to be my birthday. He was my birthday present 2 years ago. So
Could you ask for anything else?
No,
I mean,
you can't.
really, you can't, right?
Right. So anyway, thank you. Welcome to everybody, and thank you for having us.
Of course. I'm just gonna flash these messages real quick. Miss Estrella, Mr. Joe says, "Go sis." Mr. DeLeon says, "Knowledge is power." Mr. Mike Gomez says, "Very much so amazing." Miss Rebecca, wait, I didn't know you did this. I'll catch the reap. Of course you will. And Joe once again is yelling, "Coach."
Yeah, tell Joe I'll check in with him soon.
Awesome. So let's start the show. We weren't able to have Carolyn the first show, and this was something that I think all three of us were pretty disappointed about. We really wanted to have you on. Guys, I'll just put this on the table. I was privy to have a conversation with Carolyn earlier in the week. And I just got to know her personality, a little bit of her background and experience. So with that being said, can I call you Carolyn or
Of course. Of
okay,
course.
okay. I like being formal. I was brought up that way.
Nope, you're fine.
Okay, awesome. Carolyn, being that you're in the South and the experiences that you've had over the last, 10, 15 years, and now with COVID, what do you see as far as the differences are concerned and the approach to how the systems that you were under before and under now? What are the differences in their approach to education? And do you find what they're doing now, whether it be smaller classes or social distancing or whatever measures they're taking now in Florida, do you see a huge difference in the way these systems operate, or are they a lot similar?
I think that with COVID in particular, the biggest difference is, unfortunately, we have, the school systems have to pretty much abide by what the governor wants to put in place. And yes, there is the influence of the state, the health department, but it's primarily based on, if the governor says all the schools are going to open because he's being told that's what needs to happen, then that's what's happening. The superintendent that we have she really walks a tightrope, and I have a lot of respect for her because she emails us weekly, and you could tell the undertone of what she's saying is that her preference would be to not probably move in this direction because we are in the middle of a pandemic, and Florida was a hotspot for a long time, and now we're resurging as such. But unfortunately, she's also under his umbrella as a superintendent. So we started back in August, and everyone's wearing masks and the kids are wearing masks, and inevitably you can't really control an unseen enemy. So we currently have 3 high schools that had to close. And now the pandemic is striking the elementary schools. So there's currently like 10 elementary schools that have different classrooms that are quarantined. And you juxtaposition that with what's going on in New York, because my sister keeps me in touch, informed what's going on in New York. And because of the governor they have, it just seems like it's like night and day. The governor of New York, it sounds to me like he's really looking out to make sure that safety is paramount to everything, that it's not the economy that's driving his decisions. Where here, it just seems so careless and irresponsible. And honestly, every time I go into work and before I hit the door that I know I have to put on a mask and I have to have my temperature taken, it's like my blood pressure rises.
Wow.
And when I see these innocent children, referring to the COVID, like they can't high five each other because of COVID, you can't do this. And they actually use the word COVID, this, that, and the other thing. It's really disturbing. And my poor principal, like I had a heart-to-heart with her the other day, and she and I were talking about how we can't sleep at night because we feel like it's just a matter of time before we get the first case, the second case, the third case, and possibly have to go full virtual.
Yeah.
So it makes a huge difference the way the situation's handled from the top and the way it trickles down to the level of a school, and it makes it very challenging and very frustrating. Right. And for me, I have a pre-existing condition, so I walk around like almost with anxiety every single day because I'm like, when is it going to happen?
Well, Merrill, with what Carolyn just brought to the table, is there any parallels to what she just said to the situation that we see or that you're experiencing yourself now presently?
Absolutely. You have a lot of schools within the city who are going hybrid,
Right.
you know, remote learning and in-person learning. But it's very disconcerting because of the fact that, you know, I'm in the charter school sector,
Right.
and there it's like night and day. We're full on remote.
Right.
We're not taking any chances in, you know, in health and safety of our scholars,
Right.
but they have the resources. The resources are there to allow for this remote learning to prosper at 100%, you know. But there are some challenges to that where it takes a toll on the students, the scholars, and you know, specifically because they can't interact with their classmates. So that social interaction is, you know, put at a disadvantage. In terms of the governor here, like Carolyn said, he's definitely looking to preserve health and making sure that that students here are at a situation where everyone is safe. Now, it's hard, but I think it's a necessary, unfortunately, a necessary evil.
Right.
You know, because we don't want the numbers to rise for the staff or the students, and where the staff have families too, where you have to think about that. You know, we come and we perform and we do a service that we love. We love kids. You know, as an educator myself, this is new to me.
Right.
You know, I wasn't doing remote learning from when it started in March to June because unfortunately I was laid off from my former employer.
Right.
But now that I'm with a different network and I'm here from the beginning of remote learning, it's a lot.
Yes, it is. It
It's a
definitely
lot.
is.
It's a lot on me as an educator because this virtual is artificial. Whereas I'm trying to develop relationships from an adult to a child, it's very hard to develop a relationship virtually with this screen.
Right.
As adults, we have that ability to do that. We can have a long distance relationship where we can get on Skype or FaceTime because we understand that we have that ability. But a child in elementary or middle school, or even high school for that matter, they need that tactile, physical touch to build that relationship. And it's very hard on a remote level.
That's an interesting point. John, from what Carolyn and Merrill just stated, and I know you're a big proponent about this because we've had this discussion before. Looking at the situation from where you are, do you feel as though the powers that be are really, one, taking the correct approach, and two, properly setting aside resources to make this situation work for not only the teachers and the staff, but the actual children?
You know, Ernest, the rhetoric is clear.
Right.
Everyone's saying the right thing for their audience. I'm sad to hear, I'm sad to say that the children are the biggest losers here.
Mm-hmm.
The children, you know, are probably the most resilient as children always are, but they are also they're losing big time. And I wouldn't even say that virtual is a bad thing. You know, I'm not going to say that. I'm not, you know, I do a lot of virtual workshops with the college kids, and they're college kids. They've already, you know, they've gone through a lot. But I would say that if you want to talk policy, the policy has been confused from the beginning. We've gotten, so if the policy has been changing and the ball has been moving all the time, or what do they say? The hoop keeps moving or something. It's impossible to throw the ball in a hoop that keeps moving. And so when you get down to the granular level of a school, where administrators like Carolyn have to sit, and just what resonated was hearing the difficulty her superintendent was having in articulating, forthrightly, because there are these larger powers that be that are really exerting pressure, So if you want to say, are the policies there for what they are? Because I'm no Cuomo fan. It's just, I'm going to put that out there. Is he better than DeSantis? Absolutely, in any way, shape, or form. Then we get down in the city. Is the mayor doing a good job here with it? Where they open schools like he was gung ho, And sometimes I feel here it's like their little pissing contest that is getting in the way of what we're supposed to be doing. I'm open, I'm not, so that they're there every day, So on the school level, however, it's abysmal, because principals are being charged to do things that, may be dangerous. We don't know in the long run, right? The schools are no longer vibrant community entities. What are they? They're like little ghost towns with a handful of kids coming in here, a handful of kids coming there, and it's like, wait a second, why even bother going? It's like the kids have to be, as Carolyn said, you can't high five. It's like everything is COVID, air hustle, and like 6 feet away. But the larger issue is that the teachers, instead of having if the policy had really been good, they would have spent time from the beginning of this, knowing that this was going to last, and say, mandated over this summer, we're going to learn how to teach remotely in a vibrant way, so teachers don't feel like Merrill's saying it's a lot. Yeah, it's a damn lot. I just learned how to do breakout rooms, and it's like, like this kind of stuff. You got to learn how to manipulate the technology you're using to make it vibrant for the children. And the children are sitting at home, they're losing out. And the ones who are really losing out are the poor children who, and let's face it, all of us with net neutrality that passed, you never know when your internet's going to go out, and suddenly you're in the middle of a discussion and your face is like on lock. Because you froze,
All familiar for everybody.
Like everybody's wondering, what did he just say? Are they talking to you and no one, so it's like this kind of, and that's where middle class folk who have stuff. What about the poor kids who don't have internet connectivity? Or what about the homeless kids who the shelters aren't getting any internet action? And we service a lot of children here in New York City who are in destitute situations. Yes, and it's getting more dire because their parents are becoming more destitute as this economy dwindles. New York City has been hit hard, and we know how the federal government has been dealing with New York City. So that's the long-winded answer to say the policy sounds good, but the kids are getting.
Carolyn, listening to what John just said, I happen to agree wholeheartedly. Even with coupled with what Merrill brought to the table, children and adults are on two different planes of understanding. Adults are able to discern and understand a relationship or communicating with each other in the virtual world, right? We understand the nuances of it, and we know what to take away from it. Children as young as they are, even into like young adulthood, are still developing, right? Do you feel at any point that these children will adapt and start to be able to understand what's happening to them and around them and be able to learn at any level in a virtual world?
Honestly, the way I see it is that I think virtual is truly the way of the future. I think that brick and mortar is going to be phased out at some point, because if you think of it fiscally, it is more cost effective to have a laptop and internet than to pay for gas, light, structure, deterioration, all these employees where you can just have one teacher, let's say 40 kids online, and do what he was talking about, breakout rooms. So, I really think that it is going to go in that direction anyway. I'm familiar with some current, Florida has what's called Florida K-12, and it's a very successful online platform for parents who prefer that their kids, for whatever reason, learn virtually. And they do really well. I mean, they take ACT, SAT courses and all that other, competitive with brick and mortar learning. I think the struggle is that this, now that we know that the federal government was aware of this coming down the pike, and the fact that it was kind of shoved to the side and made to seem like it's just going to go away, and people believing that, where they could have been putting systems into place to kind of prepare. And if we had to continue virtual past May, until we got a grip on this thing and it started to recede, more training like what John was talking about, I think that probably by December we could have started wrapping up having the virtual position that we'd have to take for safety purposes, and maybe start reopening in January. But because it's basically a shit show, I can't think of any other way to put it. And this whole, every school has a hybrid model, and hybrid really stinks. Like at my school, we have, let's say we have 2 third grade teachers at the physical school. Then we have one online who's got more kids that she should have that she's teaching online. Kids are very resilient, right. But I think the piece that is detrimental to the children is the accountability of the adults that are with them. So the parents had the choice to keep them at home or to take a chance and send them to school. And a lot of them that chose to keep them at home were for reasons like, I have a pre-existing condition and I can't risk sending my child and having them bring something completely understandable. Or maybe the child itself had a pre-existing condition, or a sibling. So people had some legitimate reasons, but then the kid isn't showing up for lessons. The teachers are complaining they're not showing up for lessons. Hi, doggy, whoever's dog that is.
I was
I don't know what dog it is.
Sorry, Carolyn, but I was supposed to make sure that I announced that I'm home. I'm working from home. My partner's on the road. Don't lose your train of thought, Carolyn. Okay. I'm working from home. My partner's on the road, and she left the dogs with me. So if you happen to hear them, that's what it is. Sorry.
Not a problem.
Anyway,
so, the struggles that we as educators in this, I call it the age of COVID, teaching in the age of COVID is what I call it, is that the parents that are choosing to keep their kids home aren't doing their job. Mm-hmm. So, it makes it that much harder for people that are physically at the buildings, the teachers, the principals, the assistant principals, everybody, all the stakeholders, as far as accountability. And you're seeing a decline. We just had our first round of report cards go home, and there were a lot of failures for the kids who are online, and not because they don't have the aptitude, but they're not logging on, or they don't do their assignments. And it's almost like, one teacher was telling me one of her kids logged on to the morning meeting wrapped up like a burrito. And she's like, this is like you're in school, you're just in a different location, unwrap yourself. And I'm like, this is insane. Kids, they'll adapt, but my biggest concern right now is parents that are choosing to keep their kids at home. What do you see as your responsibility with supporting your children that you're choosing to keep home? Because there's things beyond the control of the teachers who have to teach them virtually. Mm-hmm. You can't control what distractions are around them. You can't control, saying to the student, okay, turn around, log in here, do this, do that. You can't control it. You can just direct, post, and hope that they do what they need to do.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, where in a brick and mortar setting, obviously you have full control.
Right.
So, we're finding that there's becoming this divide of like, almost like the haves and the have-nots. I hate to use that term, but that's the only way I can think of it, because kids that were successful in the physical setting are now virtual, and they're like struggling big time. And a lot of it is just the lack of structure.
I think that definitely speaks to a bigger picture, right? I believe in this whole my friend calls me a cynic, and that's fine, but I think there's a bigger picture that's playing out in front of us. And a lot of people don't want to sit with that reality, because that reality is really stark, because it brings us away from this world that we've grown accustomed to. But playing off of what you said about virtual learning and brick and mortar and virtual being the new way, John and Merrill, you guys would understand this, but Merrill, I want to ask you, and then John, I have a question that ties this all together. Merrill, if virtual is the new way, and we're going to do things in this setting, what happens to sports? What happens to all the other items um, that kids would take part in? Um, where does that go? How is that structured? How is that set up? Because COVID at this point in time doesn't seem to be taking a break or a vacation. And with the leadership around the country, period, it just seems to be, as Carolyn said, a shit show. So if we're going virtual, how do you see sports playing out? Like, is that still a thing in the future?
Um, if I can go back to
Please
what
do.
Carolyn said earlier about children being resilient and malleable, right? A rubber band, you keep pulling it over time, regardless of how resilient, how malleable it is going to pop, right? And we see that with some of our scholars. Just as Carolyn said, those scholars that were successful in the physical are now struggling in the virtual. You still see some scholars who might have been doing well in the physical still thrive in the virtual, depending on the parent that's attached to that scholar,
Very good
right?
point.
So it all comes down to parental involvement,
Right.
right? On either way. However, um, when I was young, I used to watch a TV show, cartoon called The Jeffersons. I mean, the Jetsons.
Mm-hmm.
And Elroy used to go to school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when Elroy was sick, he was virtually learning
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
on the
sir.
computer. Now, the Jetsons lived in a penthouse in the sky. So we know that George made a little bit of money, right? Now, although he was able to send his kids to school, right, and those pods, and they went to the high school, here's how I look at it. I think Carolyn is right. I think she's on to something when she says that this is going to be the wave of the future in terms of um, uh, uh, uh,
Learning.
virtual learning.
Right.
However, I think it's going to be for those who cannot afford to go to the brick and mortar.
Really.
Because I think, and I may be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but I think public education is not going to be free.
Mm.
There's going to come a time where you're going to literally have to pay for public education. Public education. And that if you want to go to a brick and mortar, you're going to pay for that. There's going to be a premium to that.
That's an interesting point, Merrill. And what I would say to that is this: 20 years ago, if I told everybody sitting here that you'd be paying for TV, would you have believed me?
There you go.
Right.
There you go.
But
Absolutely.
in that vein, John, because I know this is sort of your department, and I can always draw something that I'm looking for when I speak to you on this subject. Now, let's say no more brick and mortar. What happens to the funding, right? Where will that be directed? What would it go into? And then how would the educators survive that sort of change? Because then you have to take your educators and bring them into a whole new understanding of how they're going to teach, right? It's going to change. It's going to turn the system on its head, so to speak.
I can't engage in hypotheticals.
Yes, you
I'm sorry.
can.
If you want me to predict,
No.
and opine on Merrill's prediction, what Merrill is saying, from at least what I'm hearing him say, is that public education will no longer exist. We see it's under attack everywhere. We see that. It's been under attack since I started teaching in 1978. It was under attack. It was under attack in the 50s. It became under attack in the early 80s when A Nation at Risk was published. And so we move forward now 40 years later, and it's under attack still, public education.
Yes, sir.
We've become a very selfish nation. And no longer do people feel that we have responsibility to one another. We feel that the responsibility is to how can I beat the taxes? We have a leader who claims that beating taxes and not paying taxes is smart. So if this is the way, his funding, and what I fear most about his funding, not these rally people with the red caps. I don't worry about them because they're just audience for a reality show. But it's the big money backers who live in Greenwich and places like that who have funded this because they know that they are supremely benefiting. And so if you're telling me that what will happen to public education, maybe it will go away. It will be scaled down. Virtual has been here for a long time, at least 30 years. Colleges have moved to virtual learning for quite a while. We have online colleges, many for-profit online colleges where people buy their degrees, and we saw what happened to them, and we saw how this wonderful Secretary of Education bailed them out, as it were, and to the chagrin and pain of people who earned these degrees and lost lots of money because of it, including this sucker up there. And so it's like we have to fight this idea that public education should go away, and we have to work towards the moral and ethical charge that we are responsible to one another, and we are responsible for making sure that the next generation comes up. The difficulty I find has always been, the tension, I should say, began in after the Civil Rights Bill was passed. To say that we are including everyone in this experiment, then suddenly Republicans came back with, well, how are we going to pay for it? Right? Because suddenly now, and so it's always been imposing more fees and finding other gates to keep people from going through when it was fine and good prior to that. So, I reject the idea that this nation, and I'm not, because I reject cynicism. And so I reject the idea that we can't get better again. But I also think that we can get better at virtual learning. And I think that we have to get better at it. And it pains me when I hear Carolyn say how parents aren't doing their job. And because how I see it is that so many, especially here in the city, so many of the students who are left alone to do this and to learn this way is because their parents are struggling themselves to just live their lives. The kids who are most at home and have chosen most to stay at home here in the city are some of the poorest kids around. And you can't tell them, I can't teach you if you don't know how to learn.
Right.
So we have to do a much better job of reaching out to the parents, the families, and everyone, and say, look, we're in this together, and let me show you how you can learn this way. Because that's one thing missing in education, especially at the lower levels, is learning how to learn. We have to stop teaching content and teach you this is how you access content, because that's the difference for me. Content is available everywhere. Teachers have to forget content because you can get that. I can watch YouTube and learn a whole lot of stuff. I don't need a teacher for that, but I certainly needed a teacher to show me how to learn it, how to process it, how to make sure that I'm reacting and interacting with it. And what do I do to make sure that the material and I are working together? So, that's my response.
People, if you don't realize what I just did there, I got exactly what I wanted out of John without him even realizing it. And this is exactly why I can truly appreciate what you all bring to the table, because it's just, I set it up and you guys knock them down. Carolyn, with what he just said, do you feel at this point in time, especially with with the state that you're in, as in your location, do you feel
I thought you meant my mental state. It's really jumbled right now.
It's hard, right? Gotcha.
I don't want to leave it out there. I'm sorry. Do you feel that they have the capacity or even the desire, and I'm not talking about the troops on the ground, I'm talking about the purse string holders. Do you feel that they have the desire to actually get behind and build out strong programs to give you guys the tools and vehicles that you need to make these changes so that it will ensure that not only the children are on board and learning, but that the parents are somehow drawn into this? Because the truth of the matter is, and as our brother Joe stated here, if you don't have the parents behind it, the children, by some miracle, some kids do make it through, right? But for the most part, the children will not fare very well. So do you feel that in your surrounding that you have that support, or do you feel like it's going in a different direction?
I have the support from the people who hold the purse strings, or from who?
No, the purse strings.
No. This is the state of education. My 30th, it seems like every year the emphasis is less on the independent thinker and more on, can you pass the state test? Because state test equals money. And the federal government or the state level government, it's all about, I don't know, fattening the purse. I don't know to what end, because it seems like it never filters down to where it matters, which is the students. And I mean, you can take the opposing view and say, you can lead a horse to water as far as the parents, but it just, if the message the parents seem to be getting is testing, and it seems like we're overkilling with the testing, and parents are overwhelmed, as we all are. So I think in a lot of cases, I think there's like a huge disconnect. I think if I were to poll the parents tomorrow and say, do you think that people who can make decisions that will trickle down and affect you, do you feel their support or whatever? They're going to say, who are these people? They don't even know who these people are. So that leaves you at the school level, from the leadership on down, to try everything standing on your head if you need to, in trying to forge those relationships with those parents. That's the only thing that you have at your disposal. It's how can I reach and have these parents understand how pivotal their role is in motivating. It's not a one-sided, it's all the teacher's job or it's all the school's job. It's you have to have a part in it as well. And how do you do that with considering that there's people with limited skills? I mean, I've had parents say to me, I can't do 5th grade math. So what do you say to that? So you need to have something for them, to help their child at home. Or you have the parent, well, I have a newborn, so I could barely, keep my head above water with the 3rd grade or 4th grade and a newborn. So there's just so many variables, but there has to be a way that we can bridge the gap between what people who are policymakers are doing that is going to trickle down to the level that it's actually making a true difference. And I don't know if that's creating a panel discussion, like creating an opportunity for parents, teachers, and even students at the high school level to sit down with these policymakers and say, look, This is the reality of what our lives are like, especially in the age of COVID. What can you do? What can you put into place to alleviate some of this angst, some of this stress, some of these unknowns, so that we can get through this and come out the other side, feeling like we're accomplishing something?
Right.
So there's just a huge disconnect. And, even with people like, let's say, the superintendent, I mean, again, I think the superintendent that I have in my district is a pretty solid. I mean, I haven't met her, but just from the correspondences she sends, you can just feel her warmth.
Right.
But I think that once people get to a certain level, it's like they forget, or maybe they don't even have the experience, like our Secretary of Education, who has no education experience. How ironic, right? Or neurosurgeon being housing. Anyway, I think if people stepped in the shoes of the people at the front lines, which are the teachers, if they stepped in their shoes, and there are parents, like my niece right now chose to keep her 2 kids in New York City at home, and she is going completely out of her mind. But because she's committed to her children, she's going out of her mind. And guess what? They're doing their work, they're forging ahead, and they're going to be successful. But is that every case? No.
No.
Right now, everything is hard for everyone. I don't care what kind of socioeconomic background, whatever you come from. This is a very challenging time for everyone.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if money is the answer. I don't think just pouring money into something is the answer. Something has to give, because these kids in this age of COVID education that started from March to God knows when it's going to continue, they're going to have such that learning gap where we talk about. It's just going to be that you can drive a tractor trailer through it. It's just going to just get wider and wider and wider, and our jobs are just going to get more challenging. And what's going to happen, and I'm not a soothsayer, but I can see a lot of veteran teachers who went into this for the right reason, saying, deuces, I'm taking an early retirement. I can't deal with this.
Disillusioned.
Disillusioned, I mean, we had a huge retirement I work for Duval County. We had a lot of veteran teachers retire because they were like, this whole virtual thing is not for me. These are teachers who probably never turn a computer on, let alone they're going to be doing virtual. So, to those, you need the mature teachers around because they mentor the younger ones. If there's a mass exodus of those individuals, we're screwed.
John, are you okay? Are you okay with
No,
that?
I'm not, because if you're leaving because the technology is daunting, get the hell out of here, because that's not the future. Like, I'm sorry, educators have to adapt.
I agree.
If you're going to survive in the system, you have to adapt to the times. Decades and times change, and people have to change with it. And the teachers have to. One of the problems of education is we're always teaching what happened last year instead of looking forward to what the world will look like. So we have to. Where we were teaching typing deep into the 90s. And it's like, sorry, that people. Okay, learn the keyboard and move on, because tell me, my aunt who's 80, her first job was as a typist. Yes, that was in 1952, or whatever, but it doesn't happen. Who gets hired as a typist? You have to have other skills, and we have to predict. So I'm saying, if this, I can understand you leaving because you have health issues, but if you're leaving because technology got in the way, please, then you didn't belong in this business in the first place. That's how I feel. I'm sorry.
No, I think what John has just stated is a solid point. I don't believe necessarily that the example that Carolyn laid on the table, these people were like, oh, I don't want to deal with learning computers or whatever. That's the reason for the leaving. I think it just became abundantly clear to them that the workload and the change and everything that was happening was just not going to work out for them in the long run. So you have people, definitely is. You have people in the system that have been teaching for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, right? And now this happens. Leadership, and I'm a firm believer in this, leadership is the problem. So if they had a hard time before, but were still able to get through, and they were still able to make strides, with leadership being as difficult, or whatever word you like to use to address their work. Imagine this now, and trying to communicate the difficulties or getting them to understand, hey, we need to take a different approach. It's frustrating. And I think that probably played a huge part in their decision to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to put my papers in. I'm done. Right. So, Merrill, with what Carolyn had stated earlier
Hmm.
and what John added, I know that you are in the charter system. What do you think is the difference? Because I think Carolyn stated and John alluded to funding. And I know that charter schools have a different structure, especially when it comes to funding.
The
So,
bag is as the kids say, the bag is different in the charter school. The bag is
okay.
totally different. Um, Working in two separate charter schools, right? I don't want to use their names right now. There is a fundamental difference between the two that I've seen in terms of network leadership.
Hmm.
Um, I think that the present charter school that I'm at right now is more parent friendly in that we try to make sure that our parents are well involved in the education of their children. Whatever resources that the parents need, they definitely try to provide it for them. When it comes to technology, I have a couple students who are in the shelter system, and the school has gone backwards in trying to provide um, the Wi-Fi, the transportable Wi-Fi's that they can use,
The hotspots.
um, the hotspots, exactly the
Uh-huh.
hotspot, so that they be able to have the ability to access the internet
Okay.
without an issue. You
Okay.
know, um, Carolyn said, well, no, no, John alluded to the administration, right?
Hmm.
Um, I know of some administrators in the public school systems who are doing a yeoman's job in making sure that their students are trying to thrive within this remote learning.
Okay.
I have a good friend that works um, in the superintendent's office, and we were just talking yesterday about how if the Board of Education is finding a way now to get technology to as many students as possible, they're they're mailing it to them. They, I know of family members now who are in public school systems that have laptops, who have iPads provided to them by the Board of Education. That some way during this COVID, the funding has been made to allow them to access some technology in some way. My question is, why hasn't this been done pre-COVID? Why are these schools not available to have the technology where every child can get a laptop pre-COVID?
Mm.
You understand? Now, post-COVID, once this thing subsides and everybody comes back to school, what's going to happen with the technology? Are they going to collect the technology and say, okay, well, it's back to normal? It's going to be where, okay, we're in the 21st century school, but we're going back to pen and paper.
Mm.
If I
Well,
could just interject for a second, I don't think we're
please.
ever going to go back. I don't think there's ever going to be the quote unquote normal that as we once knew it. I think this has kind of changed and almost accelerated us into the direction we're going. I think the fact that now, I think about the kindergartners that are doing online learning, how much more ahead of the game they're going to be with the fact that that's the only experience they're going to be familiar with going forward. So I know with us, when the kids were given computers, laptops who needed them in March, because of the COVID, we didn't have them coming back to the school. Those computers were all sent to a specific location, and all of the schools got computers to kind of supplement because you don't know
Okay.
where these computers have been and what germs and all that other stuff. The thing I wonder about is, every year you get so many millions of dollars to spend on an assortment of things, and you would think the priority is the students and what the materials they will need, like laptops, to make sure that you have the one-to-one correspondence. Whether they have them at home or not, to me, is irrelevant. But that, unfortunately, is not the case. And the district that I work in, there's a book called Savage Inequalities. Are you familiar with that, John? I mean, that's an old book.
Of
That
course, I'm
book
familiar with it.
huh?
Of course.
Asterisk,
That's
old
like
book.
that book was so enlightening when I read it 100 years ago. But when I started working in this district, I mean, we have schools by the beach where the kids are, in affluent environments, and then there's kids in the near the inner city that had to come to the school to get lunch in the summer. And it's the same district, and the schools, the structures themselves are completely different. Why? Because the schools near the beach, if let's say the state or the district doesn't have the funding for whatever it is that they need, the parents donate it because they have, high profile jobs. So I think, this whole thing is going to kind of make everyone have to rethink what the priorities are, what the kids need in order to keep up with 21st century learning. And the reality is we're like 17th in the world for education, and that's pitiful. But yet we claim to be the superpower of the world, but we're 17th. I mean, it just, and the learning gap between the quote unquote haves and have nots just persists in widening.
17th in the world, the richest country.
Look at our health outcomes.
Right.
We're even worse. Maternal mortality or infant mortality, we're even worse. So kind of spotlights what Carolyn's saying. It's what we really value.
Exactly.
And so this is why, policy matters, and who is in office matters. And no matter who wins, it's not going to change very much. The status quo is only what Americans will accept. We need radical change. And we need radical change that will make a difference in the lives of Americans and of people in this future. We're no longer a super colonial power, or should we be one? And we need a reevaluation of our thinking, but that means to be inclusive. It means to say that what and who is an American. We see what's happening in France because of their issues of who is French, and we're getting the same culture wars here, and it's being stoked. And as opposed to saying, America can include all of us and can serve all of us, and we can redirect what we think. We're in a country where cops turn their guns on people who are standing there with placards. It's like being at Kent State all over again. And where they're willing to shoot the citizens. The violence in this country starts at the top, not at the bottom. And this is where we are in. And I'm not cynical. I can only hope that we can find great people to lead us out of this. But it's going to be a long haul. What Carolyn is speaking about, what Merrill's speaking about, it's going to be a long haul to get us out of this.
Well, with that said, and I'm glad that you brought up that point. Because in some way, shape, or form, we've all been speaking to the situation, and it all leads back to one place, and that's leadership, right? And you guys have been saying, what we go back to and what we'll accept and who's in office, and I think that at this point in time, everybody should be learning one thing, and that is politicians, no matter which side of the fence you want to fall on, still bring us to the same results. We still end up here no matter who's in office, right? There are people that have made their way into office that are freshmen, and their ideas are being squashed. Their approaches and new ways of thinking are being silenced. And that's for a specific reason. The career politicians who have been bringing us this repetitive result don't want to hear those ideas. And I think in this country, and I've said this constantly, the people should refuse to accept what is happening, one, and two, COVID should have never shut this country down. What has been going on over the last 20 years should have had bring everybody out into the street and said, hey, you know what? We're not going to burn anything. We're not going to break into buildings. We're not going to loot. We are just not going to move until all of you leave office, because we still wind up in the same place. It is ridiculous. And even in this moment that we're in, as you say, we're teaching children. Aren't children supposed to be the future of this country? And if that's the case, it's evident to me. I am not a rich man. I'm not a wealthy man. So my kids are not going to run this country. You know whose kids are going to run this country? The people at the top. And they're going to do exactly what their parents taught them to do. And we're going to stay in this position. And until people can start to understand the tools and the weapons that are being used against them, racism, classism, the state sanctioned killings that we see going on day in and day out, until we start recognizing that we're all human and of the same human family and can push aside these ignorant differences that have been fed to us purposely, we're going to wind up in the same pot, period. So what I want to say to you, John, is when do the people snap to and understand that we need to start taking this fight directly to leadership, not, against each other, but the actual leaders? I'm talking about mayors, governors, congressmen, senators, whoever, everybody that's in control, because it doesn't seem to me that anybody has a solid direction of, one, where we're going, two, how to handle this, and what's the end game at all.
Well, you know what? The beauty of Trump's presidency has gotten such a grassroots movement going. And there are so many organizations that are doing just that. I personally belong to the Movement for Black Lives, and I'm very involved with them. I'm also involved with prison abolition. So I think the stuff that we're talking about now, we weren't talking about. It was being talked about by isolated. I'll just say it right now. Angela Davis has been my shero for many, many years. And I've been working and reading her works for many years. And so, but she was always on the edge, but she's been talking about this stuff since she got out of jail. Before she went to prison in 1970. So we're hearing discussions now that we didn't hear before. So movement happens. Mm-hmm. And so I that's the hope. Movement happens, and it always happens locally. It doesn't happen federally. It doesn't happen statewide. It happens locally. So we have to make it our business and use our sphere of influence as much as we can to lead people and show people who is doing action that is meant to help us as a community, as people of a connected
human family.
I don't want to say faith, because I'm not a person of faith, but I want but I do want to say people of right minds, who believe in humanity and believe that we can be whole and good, and who actually can believe in all those wonderful words of the Enlightenment, that got us to our Constitution, the words themselves, not what comes out of them, but who believe that there is a place for all of us, and who believe that children should be valued, who believe that health should be valued, who believe that things that pertain to humanity should be valued, not things that kill us, but things that grow us.
Exactly. Merrill, do you feel, being that you're here in the city, do you feel that children or young adults or teenagers or whatever you'd like to call them, do you feel that they have a sense of understanding as to what is actually happening around them and who is involved in the decision making? Do you feel like, kids that you're around or teach or interact with, do they have a not some semblance of understanding of what's going on and happening to them with their education?
I think their level of understanding is intricately tied to their parents.
We're back there. Okay.
You gotta be. Why? Because they're not gonna it's the special child that's gonna seek that information for themselves.
Yes.
You
Very
understand
true.
what I'm saying?
Very true.
Listen, I sat down and watched TV with my father when I was younger. I watched Nightline. I watched the evening news shows with my father because that's what he was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? So as an adult, I I find myself watching those shows as well, and I bring my children with me, and we watch it together. So a child's ability to understand is going to be intricately tied to their parents' understanding of the world as well, and that of the teacher.
Mm.
That goes beyond the curriculum. That goes beyond the set curriculum.
Right.
That brings in and ties in the current events of today, so that they can get an understanding as to what's going on.
Mm.
So it's gonna to say that a child will intrinsically know and be aware. No, they're not going to do that.
Right.
But if they are guided and they are shown the way, it will pick up. They can pick these things up, and be aware as to what's going on. And they watch these kids, they watch the news, they listen to music, some of this music, I would say not all of it, but you have a lot of music now that's starting to reflect what's going on in society, like how it did in the 60s and the 70s. You have some rap artists who are now conscious, especially at the early stages of COVID and what went on with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in its early stages. And you have a lot of different artists who are coming in and they're now writing about it and they're producing these songs. These songs are being played, not in heavy rotation,
Mm-hmm.
but you do have, I know I've come across some of my students who are pretty aware and are astute as to what's going on. But to say that the majority of them are, nah.
Mm. I think that everybody can agree that the learning begins at home. And we all understand that because the children are going to be a reflection of their parent, no matter how you slice it, until they garner their own understanding of who they are as an individual and make their way out into the world. But their roots, right, the foundation of who they are, is built upon what we set in stone for them.
Right.
Right. So, Carolyn, you being again in a different state, how do you gauge these children that you have taught their sense of understanding, or have their rose-colored glasses started to lift from them in this moment?
I don't think I work with a population of students that don't particularly wear rose-colored glasses because they're like in survival mode a lot of the time.
Okay.
So their reality is pretty much in their face. One thing I find with the kids that, I work with that come to school every day is that they feel safe. They're happy to be there. And in some cases, they say, I wish I didn't have to go home for the weekend. What does that tell you? Yeah. Because if you think about it, and my husband always gets on me about this because I live in a schedule in my head. Like on the weekends, he just wants to, what I call rot and do nothing, where I'm like, I got to do this, I got to do that, let's go here, I'm constantly in the schedule state of mind. And kids get used to that.
Yeah.
And, idle time is the devil's workshop. So on the weekends, they literally have nothing to do. And in some cases, they can't even go outside because it's too dangerous. So I had a little girl today tell me, who's on the online platform. I said, because she said that she's grateful for school. And I said, well, tell me more about that. What are you grateful for? And she's like, well, I like that I have the opportunity to learn. So I said to her, well, do you miss being in a physical school? And she goes, oh, yes. And I said, why? And she says her exact words were, because I feel like I'm in a cage and I can't leave my room. At least at the school, I got to stretch my legs and walk around and see different people. It broke my heart. But I
Wow.
didn't let her see it breaking my heart. I was just like, wow, that's deep, honey.
Mm.
So, like I said, the moral of the story is it's just hard all around. But, I see some of the teachers sometimes that are just doing above and beyond because of the situation at hand. And I could see where a child feels like, why would I want to leave this and go home to, people aren't paying attention to me. And now with technology, not technology in a computer, but phone technology, you go out to restaurants, you got a family of 5, nobody's talking, everyone's on their computer. Or, here they hand their 2-year-old an iPad. That horrifies me because you see kids as young as 2, like with their face. So nobody's interacting. Where at a school, you are interacting. So something needs to change, but I don't know if it's going to, because it seems like the more advances we have with technology, the less human, that whole human eye contact. Because I'm a very touchy feely, look at me, I'm going to bend down and talk to you. And I have that with the kids that are with me. Of course, I can't touch them now. And they'll remind me, they'll be like, nope, I can't high five you. But the ones online have all these distractions. They're looking around, and I'm like, right here, look at, you know. I don't know. I'm not a pessimist at all, but I don't know what it's going to take to kind of turn things around.
Mm.
I really don't, because what I always used to tell teachers when I was an administrator was, we can't blame parents forever. We can't control what they do or don't do. We can only control what we can do in our settings and our 4 walls. But now with this virtual learning that makes it that much harder, now we have even less control. We have to figure something out, because we cannot lose a whole population of children, that the gap is just going to widen to the point that by the time I'm an old woman, we're going to have 50% of the population be illiterate. That's just unacceptable.
Well, that that is definitely a fear felt by, I think, everybody on the podcast right now. And with that point, um, John, I applaud you because uh, having having a child at this tender age,
Yeah,
right,
absolutely.
man. I,
Absolutely,
I,
brother.
I, I, I know I'm gonna get a lot
Seriously.
of flack for this.
Nah, it's real. It's real.
One, I envy you. Two, I feel for you because of this world that we're in.
Yeah,
But
man.
again, my friends call me a cynic. Um, how do you see um, bringing your son and his learning capabilities now at this age of 2? Because children are a lot more advanced than probably we were, right? Because there's so much more for them to engage in. Um, how are you finding his ability to recognize and interact? And are you going to be one of those? I highly doubt you're going to be a parent handing a tablet off to your child at any point in time, right? I think that's a safe bet.
I think I see an iPad on his couch.
If I may answer that, and I think I spoke to you about this last time. We had our little chat. I don't have, look, I live in the poorest district and poorest county, not the poorest district, but the poorest county in New York State. Every outcome, whether it's health, education, you name it, we're at the bottom. There are 49 counties. The Bronx is number 49. And, so they have that dubious distinction. You're either first or last. So at least we could say we're something.
Right.
And, we're last in everything. The local school is abysmal. I will never send them there. I take a slightly different tack. Yes, I believe that parents have a very important role. Obviously, parents, as one of the comment people said, parents are the first educators. So it's when you take this step to become a parent, you're already assuming that you're now bringing a child, and you understand the responsibility of bringing a child in and leading this child in a way that's, you hope, is going to be good for the child.
Right.
20, 30 years, it's an unfinished product, and you don't know what's going to happen. And we all know, we've seen how children end. Every time I go past a homeless guy who begs on the off ramp, I always think, he was someone who was loved at some point in his life, and he was someone's child. And it saddens me. It saddens me that we allow human beings to become detritus and discard human beings, and but because we're built into this system, this capitalist system that says this is how things should be, that there are winners and losers, which is why I reject that. And but I live in it. And so I can't reject it too heartily. I got to live in it. So, but as far I told you before, I think schools also do a great deal of damage. And I think schools are probably the most damaging thing that occur in a young person's life. And if you really want to have and what we're thinking of personally, we're thinking of unschooling, not homeschooling, but unschooling, allowing this child into garden yard. At some point, we'll send them to a regular school, but there's a whole unschooling movement, and we've been looking heartily into that. And that's what I think we're going to go in that way, and until we could find the right place. Sadly, the right place will probably cost us a lot of money, or will cost us, because unless I can lie about what district I live in and get them into a school in Riverdale, and don't think I'm not plotting that way, and figuring out how to do it, but that's the kind of games and schemes that we have to play, because it's my belief every school should be great. And
Exactly.
every school should have a high standard, and there shouldn't be this, if you're in a high poverty district and all the ills that attend a high poverty district, which shouldn't exist in this country in the first place, in my estimation. But if you do have to live in such a place, the school should not reflect that, and the school should have all the resources. Carolyn she mentioned about the rich schools versus the poor schools in her school district, and how the rich schools have parents providing, when there are gaps in the funding, the parents fill it in. It happens here in New York City. So I think that we should have a socialist educational system at the very least. And if I'm in PS6 on Madison Avenue and 84th Street, and their parents raise $2-3 million a year in their PTA, well, that should go into a pot.
Right.
So that the $3,000 that my wife's school can raise in Soundview, and the $500 that maybe they raise in Mott Haven, well, after you have the pot, then we dish it out equally. But guess what? Equally doesn't mean equal. We do it equitably, because the Mott Haven school actually needs $1 million, and the Madison Avenue school needs $500. So thank you for sharing. But we live in a selfish society. Selfishness has become the value. It changed when Michael Douglas stood up and said greed is good, and everyone got into that. And we like greed is not good. And this is the result, and this is where we are. And so we have to go back to people are good.
That's very true. And
we have to trust that people can make this world better. So that's where I am.
Well, and that's a funny thing. Before we continue the conversation, I think Mr. Davis has to leave us. Is that true, Mr. Davis?
Yes, unfortunately.
All right. Well, listen, before you go, I just want to tell you, I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate what you brought to the table, and all your opinions. And again, as I told Carolyn, and I've repeatedly told John, you're always welcome back here, and I will be calling you back at some point in the near future. So
thank you.
I hope you can give me another portion of your time somewhere down the road.
Indeed.
We appreciate you, brother. Thank you for coming on.
Yes, Carolyn, good night. I enjoyed speaking with you, and John, always a pleasure, man.
Likewise, Coach. Do well.
Have a good night.
You too.
Night.
So I find it interesting that we in a capitalist society would be so afraid of competition. And what I mean by that is, John was saying, being able to distribute the wealth equitably is a point. And if we were about competition, what is the fear that some school up in, Riverdale or wherever, some affluent area in New York, why should their funding be any different from a school in, say, Soundview or Mount Haven or Hunts Point, right? If we're all about competition and people being able to compete equally for jobs, resources, or what have you, why is it that leadership keeps aligning these items the way that they do and allotting them to schools in such an unfair way? Am I the only one that's confused by that?
No, I don't even know what to say to that, but it just, like I was saying to John, I read Savage Inequalities like 15, almost 20 years ago, and I don't see any changes present day 21st century from when I read that book, that I was horrified by knowing that in the same district, there's schools that don't have enough textbooks, and in others, they have the, state of the art, the up to date technology. It's just crazy.
As far as the information is
Well,
as well. I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I was going to say to you, the emancipation occurred in 1863, and it took about another 2 years before all the slaves realized they were free, right? The Africans realized they were free. And yet, within one generation, the first Black PhD, W.B. Du Bois, was in one generation. And not only him, but there were countless. When you look at the contributions of African Americans to the arts, to culture, the education, to the religious sphere, post-emancipation, in one generation, you realize you're dealing with a superhuman race, a superhuman people, and that's frightful, because in the same thing with Latinos and Asians and pick any minority group in this country, there is such a wealth of intellectual, artistic, cultural power. And this is something that frightens the powers that be, which is why they want to hold on to something that says, let's make it great again the way it was when no one was questioning us, when no one questioned our powers, and no one was when women weren't trying to step into leadership roles. What's this? Women as principals? Come on, I was a man. My wife is a Caribbean American woman, and so, she has dark skin, and this is just a regular thing when people come in and they want to speak to the principal, and even after they've mentioned, but you are, but you are speaking to the principal, and it's like, and it does, and it's within ourselves too, because we see the white man as the guy who's in charge, like no matter where we go in America, this is the white guy, he's in charge no matter what. I was always in a school I worked in, I'm the light-skinned man. All the leadership were Black women. Everybody came as if I was the guy. No, I'm not the principal. I'm just the dean here. I'm a quasi-administrator. The administrator, that woman you just walked by, who you just looked over, and that's from our. And this is in a school where everybody was Black. Like come on now, we have to start. We have to recognize who we are, and we have to get rid of these stereotypes within ourselves also. But it's like, but the logic, to go back to your question, circle back. Let's face it, competition. Burger King might like having McDonald's next door. It's good for business, when they compete like that. But they don't want to certain communities. But they don't want you to understand who they really are, or you to be leading them. It's like that doesn't fly here, because they want their children to keep taking those same seats. When they start reading about learning what white mediocrity is, because that's what we've been living under for so long, and it's like, because when you put Black people or Latinos or any marginalized people in charge, they do a doubly better job, because they know they're held to such a higher standard. My wife, as a Black principal in New York City, probably knows the ins and outs of every regulation, and knows she can't get away with crap that many of her white counterparts don't even think about.
Carolyn.
So there's, this is a real difficult issue that we, when we start getting Black leadership and Latino leadership in all areas, obviously the powers that be might be frightened, but maybe they would wake up and realize we don't want anything different than what yours had. We just want the same stuff. We want our children to have the same opportunities. Just one last thing. The first time I ever heard this expression was I went to Pace University, which is a predominantly white school in Pleasantville, New York, which is it is what it is, Pleasantville. It's very lovely, all that stuff. And this kid, it's a business school, and this young 18-year-old kid from New Hampshire, upstate New York somewhere, he said to me, "Oh yeah, man, you fake it till you make it."
What?
I found it. Like, fake it till you that's not something that Black and Latino kids can work
Can
at.
afford to say,
They can't say, "Yeah, I'm gonna fake it till I make it."
Mm.
Because you're not given the opportunity to even get faking. When you got it. So
Could we?
So now you're getting into white privilege.
Wait. I wanted to say this. Do you think we could ever fake our way into becoming the president?
No.
I highly doubt it, because
No.
that's exactly what just happened to this entire country.
Right.
But Carolyn, this is something that I actually, and I'm glad John was speaking to it. This was something that I definitely wanted to ask you at one point or another, and I know it's a sensitive topic. Do you feel what John has said when it comes to a level of scrutiny? Do you feel that there's an obvious or an underlining undertone of level of scrutiny that you may experience that maybe some around you might not?
So let me share an experience. So when I was a principal, I went to a principal's meeting, right? And I'm sitting having a conversation with a stranger, another principal next to me, talking about the weather, whatever. And then all of a sudden she looks at me and she's like, so what brings you to this meeting? And I was like, so I went like this. I looked at the sign at the door and I go, "Isn't this a principal's meeting?" She goes, "Yeah." I go, "I guess that's what brings me here." I turned away from her. I did the New York, gave her my back. I was like, "I'm done with you." I mean, are you serious? We're all at a principal's meeting. You're asking me what brings me here?
Here to serve the coffee. You didn't know?
Or the entertainment, because I'm cute. I don't know.
No, listen. I love taking that route because I hate to speak to people about experiences, right? And this is probably off topic as far as education is concerned, but it's a factor. I hate to tell people about experiences or things that I've seen with my own two eyes and heard with my own two ears, and they're very dismissive about it, as if this is something like not only foreign to them but impossible. There's no way it could happen. And I don't think that people really take into account who we really are, who we've been conditioned to be, how to respond to certain situations. As John was stating earlier about his wife, I'm here to see the principal. Yeah, you're talking to the principal. Or in your experience, what brings you here? People tend to take that as overreaction. Oh, you're being too sensitive. You guys always want to make it about that. And I think at this point in 2020, when are we going to start acting like adults and having open and honest dialogue about this issue? Because it's twofold. We receive it, they deliver it. So when do we bridge that gap and just say, hey, you need to unlearn this? We don't need to expect this from you, right? I don't understand that. I really don't.
There's a whole new teaching that's being offered in schools called unbiased. is it, unbiased, unconscious bias, and we all have them.
Right.
So I don't care what your ethnic, it's not about ethnic, we all have biases. And I was listening to something, not any news shows that I watch, but I heard that there's a movement against having that be promoted in the schools. And I'm like, why would you want something that's going to bring an awareness that we all, not one particular group over another, although it may be prevalent more in one particular group over another, because I think in like the example that I gave, I'm sure if I took the time, which I didn't because I was too pissed, to say to this lady, are you seriously asking me what I'm doing at a principal's meeting? Am I serving? Like, why would you ask? Do you see what you're like? Is it because of the way I look? You know what I mean?
You would have been
And
seen
I'm
as
sure
aggressive.
because we were having a really nice conversation prior to that statement. So I'm sure she would have probably said to herself or out loud, like, oh my gosh, I don't know why I said that, which I know why you said it. I think that people unconsciously aren't even aware of their biases, of their stereotype. I've been in situations where people have said, wow, you're awfully articulate. I'm waiting for Latina, for a Brooklyn girl. I mean, it's fill in the blank, and it boggles your mind. It's like what planet did you fall from that you have to point out that someone's articulate? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's just mind blowing. And the other piece is, aside from being Hispanic, is the gender situation. Like down here in the South, being a person in leadership, female in a man's world, is no joke. It is no joke. It is no joke. It's horrible. Horrible.
John, with her saying, with Carolyn saying that, I'm thinking about your wife. And I have deep connections to Caribbean people, like people that I've grown up with from very, very young, and I'm still friends with to this day. And I recently just came from one of their birthdays. I can't imagine the amount of fire, if you would, that your wife may feel in those moments that she would want to lay out for this person in a response, especially.
Well, the irony is she was born here. She was born in the Bronx. So it's like, but it, with Carolyn, the response that Carolyn gave that woman, which is totally appropriate in my estimation, but at the same, because what happens with us, and especially with the darkest skinned one of us, Carolyn and I could certainly pass through life, and people that let us go into places that maybe a darker skinned person can't, or won't feel as comfortable. But why should anyone be put in the position of having to teach another person about their own bias? It's like, this should be the responsibility, and this goes back to education, of course. Like, we all should be learning in school about differences. The trend has not been that way. Of course, the trend has been to isolate, get rid of evolution from textbooks and get rid of this, to make us stupider. Boys are stupider. They live on Jupiter or something like that. But it's like,
I never heard that before. That's new.
Jump on.
Got to give it to John.
Oh, yeah, girls go to college to get the knowledge. Boys go to Jupiter because they're stupider, something like that.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we have to. Anti-racist teaching needs to be incorporated into all schools at every level. Now, and the bigger piece has to be to understand that you, me, Carolyn, my wife, Donald Trump, all of it, we didn't create the system. We inherited it. So we have to understand that we're not responsible for it. That's the only way. And the truth of the matter is, white people have to do all the work. Not that we don't have to do work. White people have to do their own work.
Yes.
And we have to count on good white people to lead the way. And white people have to be willing to go in there. And people who don't identify as white, because have to do their work separately. And then when we get to our separate places of understanding how we all have benefited from the realities of this country, even our poorest, I said this to you before, even our poorest Black children still have a toilet to flush sometimes, most of the time. They don't live in huts where electricity goes off at intermittently. Maybe if you live in Appalachia, I don't know where in the United States that happens, but you can go to the Dominican Republic, you can go to Puerto Rico, you can go to countries in Africa, you can go in South, anywhere around the world and find places where they don't have running water, where they don't have electricity, where we're more affluent that way, our poorest. So there's still that. But we still have to deal with our reality and our racism, especially our anti-Black racism that has left us in a place where we have, no matter what decade, what century, Blackness has been criminalized. And if we can get, but again, this is a fight that people of good minds and good hearts have to engage in, and I do believe that more people are willing to engage in it. It's difficult, though, when you get to the nuts and bolts, things like reparations and things like what is really right to do, and what, because then you start rubbing, because you asked a question earlier about what's fair, affirmative action is actually fair.
Yes, it is.
Because there was affirmative action for centuries. When you talk about the numbers of white immigrants who were allowed in versus Black immigrants, that when you talk about land grants in Minnesota and the Homestead Act in Kansas, these are things where you just gave folk land, you gave folk colleges, they built colleges that then GI Bill, no matter what, you were Black, you couldn't get into it. So it was a state school run by the government. So these are state sanctioned things that we have to repair. So that's where the sticky issue comes. But the truth, we all have to engage in this work. It's difficult work and it's uncomfortable. And and then white people start crying because I'm not racist. Well, it may not be, but you have to look at what your attitudes and the things that you're willing to uphold. And we got to get through white tears and white anger and say, we're still here. And the truth of the matter, what they say, 2032, Latinos will be the number one population group in the United States. So, hey, let's just keep doing what we're doing. We love the little sexy thing. Look at me. I made a kid 2 years old. We love this stuff. We're going to keep going. So
if you think,
Carolyn might even get started.
Speaking to that very point, our birth rates are not only steady, but they're on the rise, right? Millennials.
That's optimism, right?
Yeah. Well, I fare on that point because I know my people, right? Millennials are stagnant. Like young people are of the mindset that I'm not having children, right?
I can't afford children.
Well, yeah, they can't afford children.
I have too much debt.
Right.
I can't have a house.
I believe, and this is another great point that another friend of mine had brought up to me because we've been having discussions constantly over these last couple of weeks. The true resolution comes through education. And this is what I mean. I believe the way in order to overcome this issue or starting to confront this issue is through education. And what do I mean by that? If we were to teach the true and honest story of how this country was founded, and I'm not just talking how it was founded, I'm talking about every instance throughout history, rebellions, burning of towns, taking people's resources, diverting them to other segments of the population, people serving in the military, as you were speaking about, and not being able to participate in the GI Bill, redlining. If you were to raise a few generations who were taught the true history of this country, you would be able to change the minds and hearts of the people, right?
But yeah, I gotta amend that with just one thing.
Please.
You teach that. You have to teach that history, but you also have to teach it from not a deficit model as if it happened to you, but show how you were constantly fighting against it. How, because what we always don't show, and I'm looking forward, I haven't seen it, but there's a supposedly a Netflix show about John Brown. I'm really interested in seeing how
There's
that's going to be done.
there's two. There's two.
Oh, yeah?
There's one on Showtime and there's one on
Okay.
Stars.
Which is something that, most people don't know who he is.
Nope.
But we have to start, it's not only, we have to, in the 1619 project, I think attempted to do it exactly that. But we also have to show how all along the way, it wasn't a passive acceptance, and that we have to change the perspective of teaching from who was leading the way, David Walker, and all the others such as he and Nat Turner, and how they were constantly, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, all these people who actually fought back, and the alignments and the different ways that, when poor whites and blacks aligned together against the oligarchy and the ruling class. And we have to change the perspective as if it just happened along the way and everyone accepted this. And because they didn't, and to show people that there's always been a grassroots movement against the powers that be, against unfairness. So it's like, if we could change that narrative and include that to show, and through that perspective and that lens, that will make the change, that activism and being part of something and being engaged is the only way that America moves forward. And it's been part of the fabric of America from the beginning. Not that when you're an activist, you're actually anti-American or something. No,
Exactly.
It's been that way from the beginning, and we can show that. But that happens in small places. It's not going to happen in Texas. It's not going to happen in Florida. It's not going to happen in South Carolina. It might happen in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. Places like that. It has to be universal.
Well, I would believe that having that as a national curriculum, right? Mandated national curriculum so that children. Yeah, I know.
Let Carolyn answer that
no,
question.
Exactly.
National curriculum.
Having that as a national curriculum to change, and again, the children, and I'm talking about a few generations, to change their hearts and minds, they need to understand how the country was founded, what other little small islands of the Caribbean were conquered and used as launch pads for slavery, and what were the conditions like, and the uprisings, and the forcing out of the Spanish from Florida and making them flee to Cuba, and how did that change their landscape, and America's interferences in South America and meddling in their governments and so on. From an honest perspective, I believe wholeheartedly exposing a child, and as John said, having that other counterpart of showing that there were people participating against these actions that the government was actively taking, or people in power per se, from a child to a young adult in high school that becomes a senior high school, into their way in college, having that understanding of what brought us here and why we're in these positions, I believe would change the face of this country, right? Do you think children, and up into sixth grade, learning history from that perspective, Carolyn, do you think that would sort of maybe start to change their attitudes of their fellow
Absolutely.
students?
Absolutely. And even taking that a step further, showing them the parallels of the activism going on today and what this country was founded on. It was rebelling against the monarchy of England. So we were founded on escaping being, under an umbrella of something so restrictive and trying to pursue our own freedoms. And now if you do that today, it's considered treasonous. If you're trying to speak out peacefully and whatever, you're being a whatever, pick your word. That change is going to happen when people come together of all different backgrounds towards a common cause, a common goal, and do it in a manner that lets their voices be heard, and you can draw a line historically and see the parallels of other times when big change has occurred, and what it took for those changes to occur. And, the way they teach history in school right now is from state to state. Like, I moved down here, I didn't know anything about the history of Florida. They didn't know anything about the history of New York. I didn't know who Emmett Till was until I moved down here. And now I know who Emmett Till is. And he's considered the originator of the civil rights movement before the civil rights movement even happened, because it was such an atrocity. And so, there's a quote, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, about who the history is written by those who want to provide the narrative, or by those who, I don't know. The winners.
The victors write the history.
And I, and if you look at the history books, it doesn't really give you all that background that you're describing. It gives you one point of view, and that's it. And then, I've spoken to my friends, my European friends, and their history books are the complete, obviously not painted. You think the books in England are painting it like, oh, King George was a psycho, oppressive king, and we were like these idiots that, couldn't hang or whatever. No. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's a lot that needs to change. I'm volunteering to be in the Ministry of Education under President Biden to get that conversation going.
Well,
I swear.
I'll say this. I am a radical. I believe that the system that we live under is null and void. There are institutions that must remain intact. However, this system and those that have been holding on to it and leading it, quote unquote, for so many years, have to be done away with. And it's drastic, and that's why I preface it with I'm a radical. But the reality is the only way that this country can continue intact is if that happens. And people's understandings of who they are and where they come from and who we are together as a people changes. And the only way that happens, and it's showing to be true throughout this country's history, is through blood. And it's very, very sad. And I know people are afraid to confront that reality. But I think the last 4 years has proven that, it's sort of like a psycho ex-lover. If I can't have you, nobody can. And I really feel that this is the position that these wealthy people are taking. They see it as, we'll let the country burn unless we stay in control, because you people are not going to take control of this country. Mm-hmm. And it's, I know I get a lot of heat for speaking in that way, but it's just the way I see it, and yes, I'm afraid for my young children, but I also have a lot of hope for the people that are in this country that realize and see things for what they really are. Right. But with that being said, I just want to tell you both, I appreciate both of you tremendously. You guys bring so much value to these discussions. And again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys coming on the show. And at any time in the near future, you'll get my weird, misspelled emails requesting your presence. And I really hope that if we get over this hump in the next week, because I really feeling like October was the last month of peace in this country, we can revisit and have a conversation in the next couple of months and see where we are, and sort of, see if we're happy or if we're still frustrated, or, wherever we're at. I would like to have you guys on and readdress this situation. But again, thank you so much for joining me. You guys enjoy your weekend.
Thank you for having me.
No, of course.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And I will be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Ernest.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Carolyn. Pleasure meeting you.
Oh, yeah, she's on there. People, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Educators 2 with Miss Carolyn Estrella Aponte, Mr. John Losasso, and Mr. Merrill Davis. once again, they've come onto the show, and I can't tell you how much admiration and respect I have for these people. There's just no words to describe it. I hope everybody learned something. I hope this was informative, and I hope you join us on Sunday for Mighty Healthy Part 2. It's going to be a great show. But for right now, live the life you love and love the life you live. I will see you on Sunday. Have a great week.